Episode of Unfiltered coming your way right here and now. This one officially going in the books is episode 260. You can get on board 24/7, 365 on the revolution. It is easy. Apple, Spotify, everywhere you get your podcast. Artist formerly known as Twitter, X, if you will. Duke, do you call it X? Are you Twitter or X?
I go back and forth, Case. I've been trying to call it X. It just doesn't flow off the tongue that well. I go back to Twitter a lot.
All right, so we'll go Twitter. At Casey Sturge, jump up into the bio, head over to the YouTube channel. All the content, 259, now 260 episodes. Like, subscribe, thumbs up, tell all of your friends. Speaking of friends, today on the episode, we go around Major League Baseball with my good friend, Jim Duquette, kind enough to join me here for a few. Duke, always appreciate this. How are you, sir?
Everything is good. I am fresh off my trip to Arizona for spring training. You've been on that tour with me many times, and yeah, it was a long one, but you know it's always good when you gather information out from those camps.
It's an unbelievable trip followed by an unbelievable diet, and that's
starting today.
Yes, I know that well. We'll get into a number, hit a lot of things. Fans, you want to comment, obviously drop it, whether it be in the YouTube or on X or Twitter, if you will. We are presented by BetOnline, your number one source for all your sports betting needs, latest odds, lines, matchup reports, baseball, basketball, boxing, golf, whatever you want. They've got it. Fastest and easiest way for wagers, casino and card games available right from your phone. Get to the website, your mobile device, and sign up and get in on the action today. Use the promo code BELIEVE. It's BLEAV. You'll get a 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. It is BetOnline where the game starts. And I got to start here, actually. Yesterday, while you were doing your travels, I'm sure, being a football fan and a Ravens fan, you saw on your Twitter timeline or wherever all these NFL moves that were happening and all that buzz that is created by NFL free agency. And I have felt it and covered it. The NBA does something similar. The NHL is that way. Now, it's a few crazy days. It's not several months. But the hot stove, Duke, been kind of lukewarm. We still got some big free agents, which we'll get to, that are out there. Are there times where you sit there watching the buzz of these other sports thinking, man, I wonder if there's a way without a salary cap to somehow make this offseason more exciting than it is currently?
Yeah, I wish there was. And, you know, I think when we go back to when the collective bargaining agreement, we put a freeze on the signings and you saw a deadline, right? It was early December. It ended up, we didn't have any winter meetings that year because of it. You saw a ton of signings leading up to that. Then there was a pause. And then there was all these signings just as we got out because it was a quick return to spring training right after the settlement. And that was like the closest that we've ever had to what we saw with the NFL yesterday. And we have to try to do something. I know this has been a topic by the owners with the Players Association. It was talked about a lot in the last collective bargaining agreement. The union decided they didn't want to do that. They don't like, as we know, restrictions on signings. They don't like caps. They don't like floors. Like they just want to keep this open-ended as much as possible. I do think, though, there is something we could do as a sport. And I've been saying this for a bit. Let me throw this to you too. We could put a deadline on trades, which a lot of times jams up the winter because we're going to try to trade for this guy or that guy, and they're always putting that out there as well. We're pursuing the trade market first. If we put it, we have a deadline already in season. We could put another deadline. You name it, end of November. No more trades until spring training, whatever. That's the only way you can improve your team is going out and signing guys. I think you'd see, first off, a lot of activity with the trade deadline leading up to that. And then I think you'd see more, personally, I think you'd see more activity on the free agent side. So I don't know. I think there are ways to do it, to at least try, because this winter, all the millions of dollars we spent at the winter meetings, and there was basically nothing going on. It's kind of embarrassing, I think, to the sport.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I always say those trips went from a lot of moves to, hey, it's great to talk to everybody who's in the business, right? And to have all those, it really is better in the lobby or hanging out at the bar because you get those conversations and you get intel, if you will. But nothing ever happens. One thing I have always thought about is, and we know these moratoriums, they're BS. Like in the NBA, they've all had discussions. There's all been conversations. We get that before the signing period begins. but maybe even if the league backed it up into where when winter meeting starts, it starts, let's say, I don't care if it's at midnight or whenever, everyone's already there. That's when free agency officially opens. So at least you don't
Right.
have even those few that file in November. You might get 6, 7, even 10 signings in the first few hours that have been done at least, but have not been announced yet. Even something to try and cut down that window. Because the problem is, Duke, is that there's nothing, forget forcing, that's even enticing any of these teams or players to bite on either side of that road to get a deal done.
Yeah, right, exactly. And usually the later you go, like we've seen this year, the more of a discount you get. And a lot of the Scott Boras represented clients, he's been holding on, waiting for, these moments. And listen, there's a combination of factors, I think, too, with the RSNs, kind of being uncertain in the local revenues with the sport. A lot of these teams didn't know and don't know what those revenues are going to be. So I get why teams maybe aren't willing to spend, but I feel like as an industry, it's gone, in a really different direction. And you're seeing, way more teams kind of wait this thing out. And kind of, I don't know, you don't have much leverage a lot of times with Scott Boras. And this is one of those years it looks like you're going to have leverage with him. So, I think that part. I'll tell you the other thing. Teams love draft picks, don't they? They love hoarding prospects. They love draft picks. You could incentivize, some of these teams if you're let's say a low revenue team or a revenue sharing receiving team. If you sign a player during this window, you get a draft pick after the second round or third, something like that. Some kind of incentives. We saw the rule of the major league service time manipulation that went away with the incentive of, if your top prospect becomes a top either rookie of the year or second, I think it's the top 2 in rookie of the year, they get a full year of service time no matter when you bring them up. So you don't have as much service time manipulation as we used to. And by the way, if he does get rookie of the year or second, then you get a draft pick as compensation the next year. So a little bribery for front office executives, it wouldn't hurt.
Yeah. You mentioned the leverage. And one thing it seems like, Scott, and it's been this way for a long time, we're waiting for some injury, some desperate need that a team will have to then acquiesce or cower to come his way versus where he and the Bellinger deal had to come the other way and go down to that kind of creative deal. However you spin it, they had to come towards the team. He wants the team to come towards them. Well, Garrett Cole getting an MRI is the kind of thing where, okay, all of a sudden everybody jumps and says, well, now that Blake Snell standoff where it seems like there's been some offer out there forever, the Yankees haven't been budging. Well, maybe that they'll do that. The danger, though, Duke, on the other side is that if that doesn't happen, if the Yankees won't go in this case, or Cole's fine, or some other injury doesn't come, now you're already into spring training. How fearful would you be if you're a general manager of a team bringing in guys once the season begins, deep into spring training, not knowing what kind of preparation they're doing, right? I mean, you're not sitting there watching bullpen sessions. They could be saying all the right things. How does all that work when you're now already deep into camp with some of these guys like Snell and Jordan Montgomery?
It is difficult for any player to jump into a new situation, a new clubhouse, right? It's not like it hasn't been done before, but there are plenty of times where it's just an uncomfortable feeling, but you take the length of spring training to get to know your teammates, to get to know your catcher, if you're a pitcher, a free agent pitcher. And now with these guys jumping in when they are, you hit on a couple of things. First off, you're not sure how much they've been training, and Scott will say, well, they've been getting their work in a major league environment, being ready for the start of the season. But it's not the same. Any player will tell you it's not the same, other than being in spring training on your own and facing live hitters and getting that feedback that you're always looking for to make adjustments. So that's number one. Number two, there's always that urge. Whenever you do sign, you're already going to miss the first part of April. Right? What if you're going to sign a 1-year deal, and go back out in the free agent market at the end of this? Teams, for me, you're going to get 5.5 months, 5 months of service out of this guy. Like Like, to me, there's so many different factors, and it's not easy for a guy, especially a guy like Snell, who has had control issues in the past anyway, to jump right into the middle of the season without working out the kinks in a spring training environment. So I'm really skeptical. I'm hopeful that when they do sign, it won't be that big of an adjustment. But I'm skeptical because we've seen this over the past. The two that I can recall that were signed really, really late. You remember this too. We talked about it before. Is Kendrys Morales and Stephen Drew.
Yep.
Those are both Boris represented guys. They signed late. They didn't come until after the draft, so there's no draft pick attached to them. But they came in and they had bad seasons. I mean, that's and for me, that's always the cautionary tale about signing these guys late, is them having a bad season, and then you had all this money, you spent this money on the guy, and he didn't produce what you were hoping.
I know you're heading down to Porter in a bit, and obviously the Mets, a team that you cover plenty, dealing with not only your relationship with them from working for them, but with SNY, and clearly, I've got the 86 photo behind me. I've got a relationship with them, with my soul, and also with my therapist. Edwin Diaz yesterday. Great performance, 3 strikeouts. I mean, obviously, more for him to say than for us, but mentally and for confidence-wise, that has a huge boost for the Mets. But overall, outside of just Diaz, should there be a level of optimism with this team? Right now, it's trepidation. I look at them, and I think they're more of a seller at the deadline than they are a buyer as we head towards that. I think they're more of a future team. Am I wrong? I mean, paint a pretty picture for me. Can this be a more competitive team for a playoff spot, even a wild card? We know they're not Atlanta, but can they be a more competitive team maybe than some people, including me, are giving them credit for?
Yeah, I think listen, there's a chance that the roster will look better in 2 months than it currently does, at least when you compare it to the Braves or even compare it to the Phillies. So the two main teams in the division, right? It's hard to see, talent-wise, them stacking up, especially in the starting rotation. The one thing I will say is, a couple things. First off, Luis Severino is a guy we know where his upside has been in the past. So if he ever figures it out, he's had a pretty good spring. Again, you have to be cautious. As spring training doesn't mean anything. But for him, the confidence factor is important for him to get off to a good start, and he has. And he knows the manager well, so there's a comfort level there too. And then hopefully, Senga comes back and he's doesn't have any more hiccups the rest of the season. That's a big if. We don't really know. There's a couple of starters there that I think will keep you in the game. To me, what you're buying into is what David Stearns is past, what he has done as an executive. And his evaluations, they're a little different than others in the sport. He's had success with a lot less payroll, with flawed teams. Those Brewers teams that he was running were never perfect. Every single year, there was always something where like, I don't like this with the Brewers. I don't like that with the Brewers. And all of a sudden, they're winning the division. Craig Counsell was their manager. They won 3 division titles in the last 5 years before he left for the Cubs. And David Stearns was executive for 2 of those 3 division titles there in the last 5 years. So it's like he knows what he's doing, and I think he's looking at depth in pitching, which I would say they have for the most part, not quality necessarily, but depth. And then defense, which if you look around the diamond for the most part, I think, and even in the outfield, I think their defense is better than what we've seen, especially in the outfield. So I think there's a pathway. It's not going to be easy. There's a very small margin of error. If they have a couple of key injuries for me that, to let's say, quality players, like if Marte can't play, again, or if Nimmo would have the injury or, somebody like that, I would be concerned about them long term. But I do think there's a chance they could be, this year's version of let's say the Diamondbacks, where they get in at 84, 85 wins, something like that.
I think the good news is for Carlos Mendoza, just to kind of follow with the Mets, there's not a lot of pressure on him. I mean, there may be from Met fans that just aren't paying attention. But normally when you walk into a situation, whether you're a new manager or not, there's a level of expectation that comes with a team that's in New York. I mean, having to go back to when Dave Roberts joined the Dodgers, right? For example, this isn't just about the Mets, but when you're Mets, Red Sox, Dodgers, Yankees, these premier franchises in these big markets, there's a lot of pressure. I think considering, you tell me I'm wrong, considering the fact that you've got, the downplaying of what this team could be, right? The lack of expenditure in the offseason, and the fact that everybody knows that the Braves and the Phillies are just, heads and tails better than what the Mets are right now. This is about as easy a way to kind of file yourself in and get your first year out of the way as a manager, is it not, for Carlos Mendoza?
Yeah, it's hard to lower the expectations in those cities like New York and LA and Boston and Philly. And I think that this, I don't know if it was by design, but the front office certainly has done that. They've lowered the expectations on the team. And I do think that, in year one of a long-term deal with both the manager and the president of baseball operations, it's not the worst thing to, exceed expectations, which I think is the goal here. And, a lot of times, and I've had this conversation with several executives, including one with the Mets too. But the metrics sometimes, when you look at projections, which we have the eyeball test, and then you go and you look at the projections and you go, where's my team stack up? It doesn't do justice to teams' defenses. We still as a sport don't do a great job of evaluating team defense, and so there is a feeling within some of those teams that that are flawed. They're like, listen, we have good pitching, we have good defense, we have a chance to exceed what the projections are. And I feel like there is that philosophy within the Mets that they believe they're going to exceed, some of the win totals that have been thrown out there. And if they do, then they would be, I think, in that mix for a wild card bid.
I want to hit a couple of teams that you saw in Arizona, but I got to get this on one that you didn't end up getting to see, but we all obviously know plenty about what the Dodgers have created this offseason. And I got to talk about Mookie Betts here for a second with you, because he has been, to me, even though he's been at MVP level and MVP caliber, he's always overshadowed by some story that we're discussing, whether it's the Aaron Judge season, whether it's the Shohei Ohtani year, now with Shohei Ohtani and Yamamoto being on his own team. The amount of guys in my lifetime, and I'm curious your take, is way more expansive than me in terms of, from development and being on the farm and eyes on talent. The amount of guys that I have ever seen play who could just ho-hum, go from 6 Gold Gloves in the outfield, play second base, shift over and play shortstop, and legitimately be able to sell a story that by the end of the season, if you give them enough time, they may be Gold Glove caliber there too. Bowles 300. I mean, I think if we asked him to go play football, he'd be in the top of my list of guys who can go play wideout or something tomorrow in a slot and go be Odell Beckham. How about just the level of talent comparatively to anybody that you've seen to be able to just transition this way, Duke, now over to shortstop for Dave Roberts?
It's really stunning, because you see guys go from the infield to the outfield, right? So, I'll use Craig Biggio going from catcher to second base to the outfield. Robin Yount from shortstop to center field. Those are the first two to come. And by the way, both Hall of Famers. But they did that well. I think with a guy like Betts, he was obviously an infielder in the minors. Then they moved him to the outfield based off of need. The Red Sox did. And then to move back into the infield, that you hardly ever see that. In fact, I can't remember anybody going from outfield to infield. It's always the other way around. And then to go to a key position at shortstop, like second base is one thing. It's okay. You have that ability to maybe not field every ball cleanly and still make the play at first, at second. Where at shortstop, you cannot make any type of a slip up, because you won't get the runner at first. And he's going to go over there, and who knows? He might end up being the shortstop for the entire year, the way Gavin Lux looked out there, and some of the issues that he was having with the throwing. So the guy is amazing. I agree with you. As a football player, I'd love to see him as a wideout. I think Patrick Mahomes throwing to him would be amazing. Or even Lamar, my boy Lamar.
But he
But
could do
I think
anything.
with,
I mean,
I mean,
he could do
right?
anything. I don't know if there's anything this guy can't do. When we talk about like great athletes, right? And we think about like in our lifetime, we probably have some of the same list. Bo Jackson comes to
Yeah,
mind, right? Deion Sanders, right? Yeah, Michael Jordan. Like there's certain guys where it's like they're
yeah.
athletes above and beyond what we normally see. Baseball players never get mentioned in those categories. People never players that way in that overall has got to be one of the great athletes of this time period to be able to be
Yeah.
as successful and to stay as healthy as he going to the post every day doing it. I just think it's so impressive, and I know he's going to get out now by Ohtani again, this time on his own team.
Right.
But
Right.
a pretty special talent. You think the Red Sox would like him back? Yeah, the Red Sox. Uh,
We could do a whole show on just how the Red Sox handle Mookie Betts.
We could do a whole show. Netflix is going to do a whole show on just about how bad the Red Sox are in general, but let's save that for another.
Yeah.
You mentioned, let me bounce around a little bit. You mentioned the Cubs before. Many times where there's been optimism and seeing plenty of different. Oh my God, he comes to the Mike Quaddy, all the way to the Joe Maddens of the world. Craig Counsell brings a different vibe to him than a lot of other managers. He's so cerebral, very calm. Everybody knows how great he is. What was the sense you got from camp, from how the players are reacting to Counts as a manager on their team, not seeing him on the other side with the Brewers so often?
So the interesting part, you find things out when they move to different spots where, maybe that was taken for granted in Milwaukee, or it's just a way they operated. And now with Counsell over with the Cubs, the attention to detail, which you kind of expect, right? Some of the little things. But what I found interesting was, the different ways that he looked at. Doing the fundamentals. As an example, he would have pitchers in the kind of the boring PFP stuff. He would put them in different positions on the field so they would understand what it was like to be an infielder, to go cover certain bases, and how difficult it was to catch balls on the run, as an example. Little things like that not only was there an appreciation from the pitcher side, but it also helped teach the pitchers, okay, here's what's going on behind me. All you have to do is go field the ball and throw it to a certain base that we tell you to, So I thought, that was an interesting part. The other thing was he admittedly said that he was, more introverted than not, which I thought was an interesting kind of evaluation that he shared with us. But he many times would sneak on some of those backfields while they were doing work. And all of a sudden, a player would look over his shoulder, and there's Craig Counsell watching him on the backfield do a certain drill and paying attention and evaluating guys. And that keeps you on the toes. Like when you're being evaluated, and everyone is, it kind of keeps you on your toes. And there's a level of accountability there that, I think every person that we spoke with, highlighted about Craig Counsell's early parts of the spring.
Spent a lot of time, as you have over the years, in Surprise with that team, and the Royals are there too. No disrespect, but we'll leave that for now. With the Rangers, and it's a different thing the first time that you go to any building in any sport, and there's talk of Target on the back and defending champ. Different vibe. And Bruce Bochy's been through this 3 times over with the San Francisco World Series, manager at San Diego as well. But a lot of his team kind of going through this now for the feeling that you got at Rangers camp.
So it was interesting because Bochy's gone through this before. Nathan Eovaldi has done it before, where he won World Series and come back the next year.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that Corey Seager's done it before, right? So they've had a couple guys where they've won a World Series, come back the next year. They know how difficult it is. We haven't seen a repeat since the Yankees of 99 and 2000 in the sport. And so, the level, they call it complacency, the hangover effect, whatever it is, it was clear. I think the main message I'll say, Marcus Semien, great, obviously one of the top second basemen in the sport. Yeah. Great guy. I mean, unbelievable acquisition, perfect fit for the Rangers. He said it best. He says, You go back and look at our season last year. It was imperfect. We had a lot of things to improve upon. Yeah, we had an unbelievable run in October, but if you just try to improve upon what we didn't do well last year, we should be in the mix again. And that, I thought, was a great message. Semyon was texting Bochy that in the wintertime. So, in the end of the day, it's kind of an odd Rangers team because they have such high-level starting pitching available, almost like a trade. When Scherzer comes back from injury and DeGrom comes back from injury and Tyler Mahle, who's a pretty good starter, that's all guys that are going to be coming back, anywhere from June, July of this year. My question is, do they have enough starters to get them to that point? It's for me a little bit weaker in spots 4 and 5, some question marks there. They think they have enough depth. We're going to see. That's one of those. I can't wait to see how this looks. They're going to have to, I think, to compete again with the Astros, who are going to be good again, and even Seattle. The Rangers are going to have to get off to a pretty good start and not get too far behind in the early part until the reinforcements come back.
I want to close with this. From the targets on the back of the Rangers to the small lettering on everyone's back, the jerseys. How much there's been a lot of conversation from media. There's been a lot of tongue in cheek. The fans are commenting. Kind of if we were going to play a drinking game of, take a sip every time that somebody mentions the jerseys at the camps you were at, just how drunk would we all be? I mean, how much conversation was there just about how silly everybody's looking right now?
Well, it was early on that was the talk, right? I mean, the first 10 days, 2 weeks, players, understandably were upset about it. They were very vocal about it, which I appreciate. Nick Castellanos, who doesn't hold back, was very critical too, and I think, what was interesting was they were trying to say that it was, the performance, it was a performance style jersey, and that's why that the lettering was smaller. There was some absurd excuses, really, really ridiculous excuses. And by the way, the see-through pants too. There's a lot of teams that had to break out the pants from last year, because they didn't have enough, or B, the pants, were almost transparent. That's died down a little bit because the league jumped in, I wouldn't say fast. They did have to jump in and try to reassure the players that they are acting on this and working on this issue, not the lettering, but that they are working on the quality of the pants, in particular. So, we'll see. It's one of those, to me, it's like, pay attention to detail, right? The league doesn't really pay attention to detail on that. There's no reason why those should have been shrunk the way they were. And it's one of those that you shoot yourself in the foot too many times. And it's happened to the Major League Baseball way too many times, at least in my opinion.
Well, we know if we were going to do a game, the league's been accountable, we would be sold sober. So at least there's that. That's Duke, true. Safe travels to Port St. Lucie, sir. Always appreciate it.
All right, man. Good to be with you, Kay. See ya.
All right, everybody, keep up with the Unfiltered Revolution. You can jump on board Apple, Spotify, everywhere you get your podcasts, Artist Forum, Twitter, X, if you will, YouTube. Like, subscribe, and jump on board as we will be with you next time on Unfiltered. As